Welcome back to the Cycle World podcast. I'm Editor-in-Chief Mark Hoyer. You'll notice we have a guest with us today. That's Peter Egan. Kevin Cameron is dialing in as usual, clicking the link and joining the studio. This is a special episode. We've been doing the podcast for a year. We've had many requests to bring Peter Egan on, and of course, why wouldn't we finally do that? I have come to Peter Egan's house in Wisconsin, and we're in the office where he would normally pound out lots of words for us to
normally either be typing or playing that guitar over in the corner and procrastinating.
No shortage of procrastination tools. We don't have a strict topic for this program except motorcycles or whatever. Honestly, we can talk about anything that comes across our minds. And how are you, Kevin?
Perfectly well. I think had things been otherwise, the three of us might have been quite well off in terms of in societal terms, because people kept saying to me, why are you going to the races with your education? You could have made all this money and then you'd be able to go racing in style. And I said, but I'd be somebody else then, wouldn't I?
Yeah, well, no one ever said with my education. You should go with your.
Yeah, let's go with Kevin's
education. You should flip hamburgers with your education, boy.
Yeah. I've heard it up and down.
Mention our sponsor, Mecum Auctions. The Las Vegas auction is coming up at the end of January. There's a link in the description that would take you to the auction lots, etc. They run financing. We always focus on the most expensive bikes at the auction. We look at our Bruff Superiors. We look at our Vincents and our pre-World War I Indian board track racers and all those things that command so much money. But there are many good buys. Las Vegas has 2,000 plus motorcycles typically. It is the greatest, highest concentration of interesting hardware, and you can own any piece of it, which is always daunting but wonderful. Like you can go, and if you got the means, you can get it.
You're going to be there. It sounds like something I have to.
It's hard to It's hard to miss because you get to see so much in one place, and it all has the promise of your ownership. That's what I find exciting about it.
Tempt yourself.
Well, it is. Yes. It's so tempting, and you get to see so many things in one room. It's just it's overwhelming and wonderful. Mecum has financing options where you can buy, you can bid online, etc. You don't have to go, but going to the auction has always been a wonderful experience for me. And I've missed a few bargain bikes. I should have bought that. I didn't register one year, and I was like, I should register, and I'll register. I didn't register, and there went that matchless that I wanted, and it was a real nice bike out of a museum. And so that I learned my lesson. We always register. We're ready to buy because you just don't know. So we thank Mecum for sponsoring the podcast. Well, you could have done something for the greater world, right? Not just rushing around in circles.
If you'd made more money, you could have hired yourself as a tuner, but then that wouldn't work because you'd be someone else. And
I did at one time consider so many dollars per tenth of a second.
Oh, that's pretty good.
I didn't think it had a future.
No.
I wanted to point out for readers / audience, listener, YouTuber people and Spotify's who can't actually see Peter Egan, so we broadcast this on YouTube and there's a video, but when we put it up on Spotify, we have to do descriptive audio for Kevin a lot of times.
I see.
Because he'll hold a part up or he'll be doing, racer hand movements like chatter. And
you can only imagine what he's doing at this moment.
And I have I just give him, I give those to the Spotifyers descriptive audio. But what's interesting, has always been interesting to me, is that as we are under the umbrella of Cycle World, we kind of feel like there's this family of people and we're together all the time. But in fact, you guys have shared space maybe twice.
I think I've only gotten together with Kevin twice. We were in Daytona one year. Remember that, Kevin? And Cycle World rented a house at a small airport.
Yes, it was the Cycle World Writers Workshop.
Yeah. And John Travolta's private jet was in the on the landing strips that were parked nearby. That's what I remember, that this was his favorite airport to fly in. And you and I sat up, I think, till, I don't know, 2 in the morning or something around the kitchen table talking. And
We missed morning practice.
that's right.
Yeah.
Needed our sleep, I think.
It was a pleasant occasion.
Yeah, it was. It was a lot of fun. Great to get together. I can't remember. A couple of years ago, we got together somewhere else, and I can't think where we were now. Can you?
No.
It was some cycle world thing or at a racetrack or something. We just bumped into each other briefly.
Here we are virtually together.
Yes. Oh, here comes the dog with a squeaky toy.
If you hear a squeaky toy,
If you hear a
folks,
squeaky toy, it's our dog.
what are you riding these days, Peter?
I've just got 2 running motorcycles at this moment. I've got my Royal Enfield Himalayan that I've had for about 4 or 5 years. I've got 13,000 miles on that. And then I've got my Triumph Bonneville T120. It's a 2016. First year they came out with the new version of the Bonneville 1200. And so those are my main bikes. And I've got a BMW 1984 BMW R100 RS that I bought back from a friend. I sold it to him years ago, and it was sitting in his barn, and I felt sorry for it because it had wasp nests all over it. And so I thought, Barb and I had we'd been to the West Coast and back on that bike together twice, and toured the Ozarks on it. And so our family photo albums have lots of pictures of us in different places with that bike. And I thought, I really need to take it out of the barn where it's kind of resting and get it ready.
It's also lonely there.
Yeah, it is. It is. It doesn't. Yeah, if you watch Disney movies when you're a kid, you think that all these things have a soul and they're missing.
Yes, certainly.
Yeah, they're missing you. They don't want to sit in a cold barn. They deserve to be rescued and brought back. And
yes,
they have a soul. Motorcycles have a soul.
It's at the heart of the barn discovery.
Yes, it is. It is the rescue.
Yep.
Yeah, I have a friend who finds he's an Alfa Romeo car guy, and he's restored about 4 old Alfas, and he says he calls himself the patron saint of what does he call of lost causes? That's what it is. The patron saint of lost causes. I said, yeah, I think I have that streak as well.
The rescue gene is strong.
It is.
I just see all the glory that something once had, and I want to put it back into it.
Yeah.
Put some heat. I just did that with an XS 650.
Really?
72 Yamaha XS 650. Got it lit up and idling and making power.
That's neat. Yeah. Nice bike.
Not a lot of friction in the clutch, it turns out. Gotta be careful with the throttle.
So you don't really leave the garage.
Yeah, we just
make noise.
Click through the gears. Yeah, no, it's it'll
watch the oil temperature rise.
Yeah,
indeed. So you're kind of you're a motorcycle recidivist.
Yes.
You have a real pattern of going back, especially not just the models you own, but getting back the bikes you've owned.
Yeah, it's a joke with my friends that I've bought back about half the motorcycles I've ever sold because I not having won the Powerball sweepstakes, I occasionally have to sell a motorcycle to try something new. And then, 5 years later, I kind of miss the one that I sold, and I see it in somebody's garage, and they aren't using it. And boy, I really would love to have that bike back. That's what happened with my Triumph Bonneville, the 2016. I sold it to my friend Bill Hall, and he put 9 miles on it in 3 years. He's got a motorcycle collection. And I just saw it I went to Elkhart Lake where he lives and saw it in his garage and said, "You wouldn't sell that back to me, would you?" And he's a nice enough guy to do it, but he's got a buyback agreement. So if I decide to get rid of it, he gets it back because he likes the bike. But anyway, so he had put 9 miles on it. And since I bought it last year, I've put 7,000 miles on it. So it's going to be pretty worn out if he ever gets it back.
When you sell it back to him. Yeah. You've been riding a lot. That's a constant theme when I call the catch up here when you do? Oh, no, Peter's either out riding or you got back or you're about to
Yeah,
leave.
we've got a lot of good roads around here. We're in southern Wisconsin. We're right at the edge of what's called the driftless area, which is an unglaciated part of the country, and it's very hilly. People have compared it, mostly me, to the Ozarks or the hill country in England or something. It's small farms and winding roads, and it's on a nice day, it's hard not to get on a motorcycle and just go exploring. I do lefting and righting sometimes. I just head out and I say, okay, there's a road I've never taken before. I don't know where it goes. I think I'll turn right, and then the next turn I come to, I'll turn left and just keep doing that and see where I end up. And as soon as I see the Mississippi River, I know it's time to come home for dinner. And,
random walk theory.
Yes, exactly. Do you do that, Kevin? Do you go
I
out
haven't
for
ridden
rides
for.
just kind of...
I haven't ridden in years. Actually.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. Because although I enjoyed riding, years ago when I started out on my humiliating BSA Bantam D1, I soon turned to the tuning side, and I gave racing a little try. And again, I felt like, why should I do this when somebody better could actually have some success on this bike?
What did you race? What were you riding?
Oh, I had a TD1B, much like the one that I have now, only a different serial number. And it vibrated so tremendously that my hands turned to just lumps of meat that had belonged to someone else. And, but my friends who were at the race said that I went faster each lap. So that's good in principle.
Good sign.
Yeah, that's what we aim for.
But there's an end point to that too.
Well, yes, there is.
Faster than you really can, which I've done a few times, and then all of a sudden you're on the ground.
The South American auto racer Jose Froilan Gonzalez was described as going faster until he'd crash. And there have been some motorcycle guys along those lines. Chaus is one of them. Carlos Checa had tendencies in that direction, but he could control it. So that was good. That's the thing about a motorcycle, is that like that ancient Central European adventurer who first managed to stay on horseback, here is your body multiplied many times by the horse's tremendous legs. And who can resist? Unlike skiing, you can go uphill.
Yes.
And
I like that about it.
Usually,
unless you have some bikes I've had. I won't say from what country, but
the D1 Bantam, good example.
Yeah, that would do it.
But I feel that it's easy to be carried away. You can say little is good, and you know where that goes. Too much is just enough.
Yeah. I had a ZX11 at one point, and I explored the top end of that, and I decided the road got very busy, but above 150 miles an hour, and maybe I should just back off on my next ride. And a friend of mine, it was Bruce Finlayson, who was a really good road racer and a better rider than I am or was, said, I called him up, and he said, "Oh, you're still alive. I expected they'd find your body in a tree."
In a tree.
What a vote of confidence. Thanks, pal.
Yeah. He said, that bike is scary. In the rain, it goes sideways when you try to slowly pass a car. And I said, yeah, you got to be a little careful. It really does make some horsepower.
The importers in Australia decided that they would have to race the XS11. And I correspond with a gentleman who said that although the dealer required him to do it, he would have preferred not to.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of horsepower.
Well, the basis of those early leader bikes was double the horsepower of traditional motorcycles using the same chassis, suspension, and tire technologies as 1965.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, in that era, fairly skinny tires. You know, it wasn't really until the Hayabusa came where we truly had a kind of modern, wide-rimmed, big old, beefy, thick fork stanchions and all that stuff to actually express itself like a sporty motorcycle.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I started box stock racing with my 400F, and then I went to a Kawasaki KZ550, you had to have stock street tires, and we were still using Dunlop K81s. That was the standard. That was the best tire, and we got quite comfortable with those tires. I mean, they were quite good. You could actually drift and control. They didn't suddenly let loose or do anything funny. They're very predictable. And years later, I think I had a set of those on my Ducati 900 SS, and a new guy who had started at Cycle World had never seen tires that skinny on a sport bike. And he said, "How can you ride around the corners with tires this narrow?" I said, "I don't know. Mike Halewood did it." But
he sure did.
Yeah.
Oh, skinny tires steer
Augustini,
nice.
you know, they made it around the corner. But yeah, they steer well and just have their limits.
Well, I just raced a 72 BMW on pretty skinny tires. And you can touch a cylinder head down with relative ease. You got to watch out. Get your big knees out there. As soon as you touch your knee down, that's the end of it. Don't take it any farther.
No.
Watch out for that curbing.
Yeah, we used to, when I was in high school, nobody had a BMW because they were somewhat expensive, and we used to look at them and say, how can they go around a corner? You know, we imagined ourselves leaning over farther than that. Which we really weren't doing, but yeah.
People spoke of dual side stands.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
How long did you road race, Kevin?
Just part of one season. And I didn't manage to crash. But there was a terrible embarrassment because when I sold the bike, I'd paid $500 for it. When I sold the bike, the new owner, the next time I saw him, he said, "Did you know you had two different needles in the carburetors?" And I felt like, oh, I'm dwindling away to a point. You know how the TV screen used to shrink and then pop, gone? That was how I felt. And so it wasn't a notable effort, but it was enough to persuade me that I liked the activity. I just didn't want to be at the controls.
Boy, different needles. You're pretty, you're a detail-oriented person, Kevin. I would be shocked to get a motorcycle from you like that.
Well,
yeah, me too. I'd be very disappointed.
That's how it goes, or went.
Yeah.
Well, you tuned race engines for people, and I raced for about 3 years, road raced for about 3 years, but I never built a racing engine. All of our I was mostly box stock stuff, so all of our modifications were rejetting and maybe changing the air cleaner, taking the lid off the air cleaner, drilling holes, and all these attempts to enrichen the mixture.
So the original 140 main jet became a 210.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, those days. Yeah.
Yeah. I started racing. Go ahead.
There came the days when the Ram airbox came out, and everyone ripped off the airbox and put it in the trash. And they went to their first event, and where did the horsepower go? This thing is limp. Did they pick up the trash yet? And they went scrambling for the airbox because, of course, not only does it ram air, which gains you 3% at 160 miles an hour, but also resonant, like blowing across the mouth of a beer bottle. And if you don't have the bottle, you can't have the resonance. So they reinstalled all that stuff, and their horsepower was back.
I did that with my 400F Honda, the first bike I rode. I I had a friend who worked in a Honda shop, and he kept recommending things I should do. Take the top off the air cleaner, now drill holes in it, now jet it at this. And everything I did made the bike just slightly slower. My lap times kept going down and down. And I finally put everything back to stock, and everything picked back up. The bike ran better. And I had just started at Cycle World, and I was telling Alan Girdler about this experience of trying to tune this 400F for box stock and having it get slower and slower on the advice of this Honda mechanic I knew. And Alan said, imagine that, a Honda mechanic in Madison, Wisconsin, who doesn't know as much as the 35 people at Honda who designed that airbox. And the intake system and the exhaust system and the jetting. And he said, when I first worked at Cycle World, everybody was bringing in bikes they had modified. And John Ulrich used to call them ruined bikes, because generally they didn't run as well as sometimes they did. Sometimes they were good if people knew what they were doing. But a lot of rejetting efforts really didn't work very well. Or, intake efforts.
A lot of details there.
Yeah.
Well, Miles Baldwin and I went to Daytona with his TZ750, which had a set of my latest cylinders on it. And at Daytona, we encountered Mike Baldwin, who said, you didn't let Kevin touch that thing, did you? And he said, yeah, all the cylinders are lying on the floor in the form of dust. And he said, wrong. He said, stock is best. And then they went out for practice, and Miles came steaming past Mike's factory KR750, and he came over to our humble pit and said, what do you got in that thing? So I was pleased. One doesn't want to do a great deal of work to make something slower.
No,
gratification, yeah.
The things that I had done were the result of a fair amount of study. And so but of course, practicality has a voice here. When I showed us one of those cylinders to Irv Kanemoto, he looked at it, actually studied it for some length of time, and then he handed it back to me. He said, how long did it take you to do a set? And I said, well, about 2 weeks. And he said, thought so. Meaning you could never do a season with those cylinders because you'd need somebody that was winding away with the die grinder the whole time.
There's work involved, in other words.
Well, yeah, but it's always delightful when something you hope will be good turns out to be good. And I had enough of those. Of course, Dr. Skinner, with his theory that intermittent reinforcement is more powerful in modifying your behavior than continuous reinforcement, because racing does not provide continuous reinforcement.
No. Intermittent, and the intermittency can be real intermittent.
Yes, indeed, such as contact breaker resistance.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to tell my parents, I was a Formula One racing fan too when I was in high school, and I would, of course, bore my parents with the latest results at Monaco or Monza or somewhere, and I would say, so-and-so was leading, but then his engine blew up or something, he didn't finish, and my dad said, why do these people keep doing this to themselves? He said, only one guy wins and the rest of them are disappointed, and their things are expensive and they're blowing up and they're crashing. And he said, why do they keep doing it? I said, I don't know. I guess they're holding out hope that they'll win. He said, but if there are 30 people, only one of them gets to win. I said, yeah, that's the game.
So many of them are just delighted to be there.
Yes.
And that's what I saw one time at a club race here at Loudon, New Hampshire. a fellow came up to me whom I'd seen at the races for several years, and he said, I'm going to stop racing. He said, my dad offered me his business, and something like that isn't going to happen twice. But he said, I'll tell you this is my family here. I feel like I'm leaving my family behind for business. But of course, business provides a moderate reinforcement in return for all of your best time.
Well, I think motorcycling does that to relationships, certainly. I remember when I had my 50th, a long time ago, I had my 50th birthday party, and we invited anybody who could get here. You know, we had a big party out in my workshop. And I was sitting there and I looked around and I said to Barb, there are only about 3 people here who don't either race cars or motorcycles or ride motorcycles or rebuild old cars. I said, what people would I know if I didn't have those hobbies, if I hadn't gotten interested? It'd be a completely different planet almost.
Gardeners, flower
I know.
aficionados,
but there's
cellists. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know. Racing feels like doing something. That's what when you get into the paddock and you've got you get those moments of hyper focus on the track, and then that community feeling, that family feeling in the paddock. We were talking about it the other day. Kevin and I raced at Barber on that BMW with Arma, and one of my pit mates, Paul Elledge, was racing a 650 BMW, and he dropped a valve seat. And he was in contention for the championship. And the guy across the paddock, just right across the row. So why don't you ride my 650? He was in the same class, but he was he didn't have hope of championship. The guy gave him his whole motorcycle.
Wow!
So he could go out and he won the championship. And and if you've got, if you need different jetting, there's going to be somebody around there who's got jetting to help you out. You're going to know the people in your class or whatever, and need a tire, need a spoke, people are there to, everybody wants you to get on the track.
Yeah. I've had a lot of people do that, save me from having to put it on the trailer and go home by donating something they had, in the parts bin or an extra clutch or something. But,
what did you say, Kevin? Especially, at a club race, everybody's leaving with less money than they arrived with.
Yeah,
so
sure.
There has to be a motivating factor. You have to have a desire, and
there are other people who want to spend long afternoons in a boat trolling for fish in the lake. I remember my dad on a cold, rainy day, with a droplet of freezing water hanging from the end of his nose. And he had this wonderful look of, he's going to a party and it's going to be great. He felt that the fish were going to bite at any moment. And I said, the conclusion that I've drawn from our day here? And he said, no, tell me. I said, this lake is filled with distilled water.
Well, it's an intermittent, reinforcement. And the reason they call it fishing is because it's not called catching.
That's right.
That's true.
That's right. There's a lot of hope there.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice being outside, but I think if I were a full-time fisher person, I guess I'd hang out with fisher people at parties,
I guess so, but you'd have mounted fish on your wall instead of trophies and things. Yeah. So
actually, we got good feedback from a previous podcast where we were talking about, chatting with people at parties, and there's a meme where there's a guy sitting alone on a swing, and this says, "This is me at a party when no one wants to talk about welding." And there were a lot of nice folks in our comments were like, "Man, I want to go to a party and talk welding and asperities."
Yeah,
yes,
pretty good.
We have a running joke. Kevin has been able to work asperities into virtually 85% of our podcasts. I know it's a thing. I think there are now drinking games associated with the podcast.
It may become a popular word that is listed as words we can never say again next year, in the New York Times.
Sure.
Sort of like iconic,
Yeah. Oh, iconic
everything's iconic.
It's really come around.
It's an iconic brand of potato chips. And so they made icons of potato chips. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, there was a sort of upper middle class news sheet that went around in Boston that, Boston After Dark, that was it. And I saw a rainy afternoon with all these professors, assistant professors, wives, lab techs, standing out in the rain to get into a little dive that had been recommended in Boston After Dark. So they were trying to maintain their membership. This place is iconic. I got to be there. And we finally were seated and could look up and say, there's that pressed tin ceiling that was installed in 1923. It was so authentic.
Authenticity.
Yeah, I think there is a drinking game associated with the podcast. I'm pretty sure if Kevin says TZ 750, people take a drink. Yeah. If I say Velicet, people take a drink.
What word would I, Norton maybe, that I would use? Or
sure.
Yeah. Okay.
But, we've been doing this a while.
The iconic Norton. I'm thinking of.
It is iconic. It is.
It's an iconic brand. Yeah.
Iconic Norton coming into.
Exactly.
And yet the people actually do say that the C100 Honda is iconic, and it's supposed to be 100 million produced or close to.
Yeah.
I had one.
Yeah.
Went to Pikes Peak, Iowa with it, with a bicycle.
I saw one that had been brought back.
It wasn't iconic. They've still got the statues there on Pikes Peak.
I saw one that had been brought back from the Vietnam War. And this soldier had crashed his C-100 and the leg shield was ruined. And he was able to get a local metalsmith to make him a very presentable replacement. And there it was on this rather elderly step through.
Yeah, that was the motorcycle for Vietnam. I was there for 14 months in the Army, and I have a picture that I took of a family coming down the road on a Honda 50 step through, and I thought it was amazing because it was a mother and father, apparently adult couple, and then two kids jammed between them. There was a kid in front of the father, and then the mother. There's another kid, and then the mother. And I was showing it to my brother-in-law, Russ, and I said, "Look at this. There are 4 people on that Honda." And he said, 5. And I said, "What do you mean 5?" And he went up to the screen back when we were looking at slides on a screen and pointed. He said, "See this little foot sticking out?" I said, "Oh yeah." Between the slightly older kid, there was another little leg in there, and it's okay, 5 people. Yeah, but they used to take past our base camp. People would go out to work in the rice paddies, and it was quite common to see a Honda 50 with about 4 people on it, pulling 3 bicycles that were tied with ropes. And usually there are 2 people on the bicycles and maybe a kid riding on the handlebars. You'd see these long streams, but that was the national motorcycle of Vietnam. And there were a fair number of Honda Super 90s as well, but that was a sign of, a little more wealth or a little more success.
It was a very attractive machine, the S90.
Oh yeah, and they didn't break. I mean,
nicely shaped.
In a nice climate like that, where it's warm most of the year, you can go anywhere, and it doesn't cost anything. It does. What is it? 180 miles per gallon we got on my trip.
Oh yeah,
but, yeah, not a bad machine.
Yeah, Jeff Allen got a photograph of an Indian family when we went in 2008 to Chennai to visit Royal Enfield. And he got a photograph of a family together and a bag of rice. And the father was riding the bike. They had a small child sitting on the tank holding the handlebars. And everyone was very centered. You just saw the expression of the father was very balanced and just, they were used to doing it. And it's really admirable. I mean, it's a beautiful application of the human brain.
I think there are probably more pictures on the internet of people carrying odd things. Sure.
working motorcycles from around the world, rebar,
a cage with a monkey in it, and huge loads of hay, and
we had a picture of a guy holding a mirror like this in between the rider and the he was the passenger, and he was holding the mirror, and it was one of our Slipstream photos, and I think Kane came up with it. Riding is a wonderful time to reflect. So
that's pretty good.
Used Ted.
Yeah, Ted, Bob, and Ted. Yeah.
You mentioned your TD1, Kevin, that you're working on now. Where'd you get that? Why? Another question.
I think I wrote a TDC about the early Yamaha twin 250 production racers, and wasn't too long before somebody got in touch with me and said, would you like to have that motorcycle? He said, I have one here that's in parts, and I'd like to give it to you. So I drove down to Maryland, and after the ceremonial handshaking and nice weather we're having, he opened the door to a shed, and there was a literal mound of motorcycle parts there, looking as though it had been dumped by a dump bed. He said, I think you'll find most of it here. And he said the frame and the wheels and so forth are in the corner, and the gas tank has been put up out of reach. So I just kept recognizing things and putting them in another pile, and finally he began to regret having said, take all the time you need. And I packed up and left, and it sat here for a long time, making only small reproachful noises. And then I decided that this COVID thing would be a good time to just do it. And because our lives here weren't much different with COVID from what they were normally, because we're at the end of a dirt road and we don't go to work with other people and don't attend schools and so on. So it got mostly built then. And right now it needs finishing touches, which of course take days. And it needs to have its fairing mounted and the windscreen put on impeccably. I say that because I once drove across the country with the image of a badly mounted screen in the rearview mirror of the van, and it just rankled the whole time. Why would I let myself do this? And so, of course, some people will say, "Oh, if you placed a strong emphasis on symmetry and so forth, you're probably autistic." I probably am. You bet.
It is hard to tolerate the crooked windscreen.
Yeah,
it is. I had a Manny fairing that I put on a Moto Guzzi V11 Sport. So Arturo Mani, the tuner, basically crew chief for MV Agusta, his family is still making parts that are very classically styled with the big fairing, and I got one of those, and you had to drill the windscreen and do the mounting yourself. And I took very long to do that, but I was delighted that I didn't crack the windscreen.
It's so easy.
Did not crack the windscreen, and I did it. It was symmetrical. The ends, because it's very long, and so the ends of the plexi were coming out to the fairing, and if you start on one side, the whole thing's going to be misshapen. You got to nail the center at the front and then start working, getting it. So I did that. And then we had an issue with the bike at the dealer. We took it to a dealer to do a service. One of our other guys dropped it off, and they sold the bike accidentally. They said, "Oh, you're done with it." Yep. And they sold the bike. And no, we need the bike back because we haven't finished this test on it. And they had taken the fairing, and so somebody else put a Manny fairing on it, but they did a bad job. It was crooked.
They did a bad job.
Oh, no. Not as bad as riding across the country in a van, but it rankled.
Let me tip this picture on the wall back
Yeah,
here
no,
and see if anybody knows. It drives you nuts if you see it. You walk in the house. Oh, wait, that's
Yeah.
yeah,
Can't have it crooked, no.
not right. Yeah, same thing. I think people like symmetry.
So have you made noise with that TD1?
I think it would start,
Yeah.
but I haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Probably chicken.
I'm sure it will, Kevin.
Well, it has spark, so
Yeah, it's got to start.
it has to run.
Yeah.
But they were such terrible motorcycles. This is the thing about racing, is that it absolutely does without nostalgia. Nostalgia in racing is for people or for days, but not for designs. Because by the end of the season, you look at your motorcycle that you built with such optimism the winter before as an assembly of mistakes. And you mentioned the long windscreen. What that means is the rider's butt directly above the rear axle. And that's the way it was done in 1950, when they believed this is going to give us traction. And turns out, of course, it didn't give them anything. But it didn't matter, because all those people that MV put on their four-cylinder could win, take their leathers off, have a rub down before the first Norton came by, or G50. 6 minutes in some cases. So MV didn't do a lot of R&D after that first intense period, what they called Nortonization, because everyone was terrified when Norton showed up with the twin loop frame.
Oh.
in 1950.
Oh, okay. A little earlier than the rotary Norton.
Oh, the rotary Norton.
Yeah.
Well, no, the rotary Norton was an anomaly.
Yeah.
Because
an experiment.
Well, I went to the Fuji circuit in 1972. Mr. Hansen had sent me to Japan to show what could be done with the stock cylinders, since they had run divided port cylinders, and Cook Nelson, among others, had said, your cylinders, they're all illegal, aren't they? It was great to hear how Bob Hansen handled a frontal assault like that. Just trying to act like a suspension damper. I'll wear him down with small objections. Eventually, both of them had to be someplace else, so it came to an end naturally, but that kind of thing. In Japan, I learned that Kawasaki had, in the way of a test track, an instrumented drag strip, and that was it. So in order to test a motorcycle on round right and left turns, we had to get into an Army-style truck and drive for several hours to get to the Fuji circuit, where Mazda was testing a multi-rotor race car. And talk about loud.
Yeah.
Two-strokes are loud because that sudden opening of the exhaust port occurs when the piston is at its maximum speed. So there's a lot of high frequency in there that is irritating.
Yeah, it's the loudest thing on earth when if it isn't muffled correctly.
Oh, the 787B, the Le Mans car is legendary for its, oral assault.
No, that's a peripheral valve engine, and so the opening speed is really rapid. So you get a good solid pulse out of it.
A solid pulse.
Yeah, somebody used to race an NSU sedan in sports car racing, and it was just like a dentist drill in both eardrums or something when he'd start that thing up. People would go, "Oh God, stop!" Just yeah, it's a special sound.
My first motorcycle, as I mentioned, is a D1 Bantam, no rear suspension, 125 cc's, 4.5 horsepower at 4,500 RPM, and 3-speed gearbox.
Essentially a Harley Hummer, wasn't it? almost
The
the
Harley
same.
Hummer was their version.
Yeah,
The Bantam was BSA's version of
yeah.
DKW's RT-125. Yes.
I kept trying to buy a Harley Hummer from a guy in my hometown. He had it. It didn't run, and he left it leaning against their house, the wall of their house in the driveway, and I had to walk past it going to school every day. And I've got to rescue that bike and get it. It's just cool looking, and I have to have a motorcycle. And I kept trying to buy it from him, and he never sold it. They never fixed it, and then the family moved. And alas, it was almost my first motorcycle. It was,
Sure.
yeah.
Well, it was good for about 45 miles an hour, and I rode it home for the summer, which was some 200 miles. And a large part of that was behind a box truck that was going at the perfect speed. I could stay in its draft. And that was how I learned about von Karman vortex shedding, because you're sitting there on your little motorcycle going, pa, 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 as the vortices came curling around the flat back of the truck and detached one after another, one whirling to the right, the next one whirling to the left. So you felt these blows. And it's also, that's how the wind in the wires produced that World War I fighter plane sound, only a much higher frequency. And I made it. The chain didn't fall off. The spark plug didn't whisker. I just chugged along at 45 miles an hour.
200 miles.
Yeah. Took a while.
Wow.
Yeah, I used to slipstream when I had my Honda Super 90. I'd ride home from college, and I would try to get behind some kind of a big delivery truck or something. And but I never noticed the vortex thing. I think I was too busy watching the brake lights to make sure I wouldn't be killed if you slowed down. But it was just like getting a free 5 miles an hour and a smoother.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Also, on the ring road around Boston, Route 128, the mass of moving cars pumps air so that you can be drafting and no car is near you. You can look down at the speedo and see you. There's the 5 miles an hour because the air is being pumped by all these cars.
It's sort of like Orange County Airport when you're landing a light plane on the left runway and a 707 is landing on the other runway, and you've got to really be on the controls, because strange things happen when the vortices come off the wingtip vortices hit the other runway. It'd be very upsetting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always worried. My related story is Velocet. Everybody drink. Velocet 500 and riding it to Salinas, and so it's quite a ride from Southern California riding to Salinas. But the wind comes up in the afternoon, and I couldn't tell if I was terrified the timing slipped because I was slowing down. You're only dealing with 22 to 27, 25 horsepower. And so you're going into a headwind, and then this wind came up, and I thought, oh no, did the timing slip? Am I going to hold a piston right now? And it was just a headwind,
Yeah.
Just a headwind.
Yeah, I run into that with my Royal Enfield Himalayan once in a while, where I really like a tailwind when I'm trying to get home quickly, from somewhere. Sure. It just helps a little bit. It makes it smoother too. It seems like nothing is working as hard. You're just
absolutely. Yeah. It's as if I'm
kiting along.
I managed to get another 15 miles an hour out of my Bantam by boring the carburetor and filing furiously at the top of the exhaust port and raising a compression ratio. The most basic things. Let the air in, squeeze it more, let it out a little sooner because it's going to rev up a little more. And I could just stay with my high school friend's restored Model A.
Wow. That's pretty good.
Chugging along.
How old were you when you were doing that?
21, I think.
Yeah. So what was the speed, would you say? The top speed then? 51
60.
or 60?
Yeah,
okay, that's moving.
Yeah, something close to
indicated.
indicated.
Well for model. That's about it for a Model A too. It's, Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that was not exactly a sterling result. I didn't think to myself, "Oh, onward! What towering mountains can I not overcome?" It just having that little motorcycle was tedious. Clutch began to slip. I went to Andrews Indian in Roxbury, and I said, "I need a clutch for a BSA Bantam D1."
Mm-hmm.
And he went back and rummaged around, and he came out with a little envelope, one of those real industrial-looking little fold-over envelopes. He said, "Here you go." I forget the price. And I said, What is it?" He said, "Cork inserts. There's holes in every other clutch plate, and you pop these into those holes, and that is your clutch."
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Velocet did it that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We modify that today now. We use friction materials and
Not cork anymore?
not cork. Nope. There were guys in the club who were saving their wine corks and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Slicing them off, yes.
slicing them and making them to size. I wanted to ask Kevin. You tried your hand at road racing. You seem to have an irresistible desire to be around motorcycling. You started tuning, and you were tuning for Boston Cycles, but on basically a national level, right?
Eventually, yeah.
Yeah. And then what was your transition into riding like? How did that happen?
Oh well, at the end of 1970, I thought, "Oh, I'll send Bob Hansen the equivalent of the famous old title, The Military Strengths of the Powers," a kind of forecast for the next year of what the different potential contenders might do. And then I thought, I'll send a copy to each of the major magazines too. And the one that went to Cycle World went with where everything that comes over the transom normally goes. And for some reason, Cook Nelson actually saw mine. He didn't say anything about it for a while. And eventually I got a communication from him in which he said, You've sent me this this forecast." He said, I can't help but notice that it's decently written. Would you care to write something else?" Well, I did care to, because it was a way of getting my fingernails into the fabric of this activity. And so I wrote the first story I wrote was about Cliff Carr and myself going racing our barn job H2R Kawasaki, because that one, the 500 was made as a production racer. It had its own close ratio gearbox. It had its own dry clutch. It had racing cylinders that were nothing like the production cylinders. But I kept asking Bob Hansen, "Is a production racer coming?" And he'd say, "They haven't told us yet. I'll let you know." And it never came. So on about Christmas Day, 1971, we took a new H2 off the floor, and I took the engine out, and I saw that I could adapt the 500 gearbox and all these different things. And Hansen sent me a pipe spec, a little piece of paper that looked like it was torn off of a notebook. I think I have it someplace. And we got to Daytona with that thing and started our engine in Daytona for the first time.
Oh boy.
And we learned about fuel starvation in a very practical way. And after we'd overcome that, the bike went through the timer at 161 miles an hour or something. And Hansen came to me and said, "We'd like to know what you've done with your motorcycle." because we seem to be stuck. And I said, well, it's on this piece of paper here that you gave me. I said, this is the pipe that I made. And I think it said exhaust was supposed to be 33 millimeters down from top center, the top of the exhaust port opening, and the transfers so many other millimeters and so forth. And he looked at me as though he gave me that skeptical policeman look. All except police are liars. And well, they got their stuff going by the end of the week, but then that was the year that all the new 100 horsepower two-strokes from Japan tore up their tires, and the race was won by a 350 Yamaha twin, as it was the following year. And it wasn't the TZ750 that crushed the manly four-strokes. It was little dinky 350 twins that did the crushing, because the Triumph BSA triples couldn't keep up. Harley was still making a half-hearted effort with their KR, XR, and it was those little triples, little twins that did the work. They just kept going. They didn't wreck their tires. They didn't quit running. They didn't have mysterious ailments. It was quite wonderful. And then, of course, Yamaha came in 74 with TZ750, and that was, I spent 10 years with that one. Learned a lot.
So the barn job was your first feature story for Cycle.
Yeah.
And then when did you start doing TDC?
TDC happened in 82 because Phil Schilling, who never wanted to be captain, he was very happy to be lieutenant. He wanted to develop a formula by which he could operate the magazine without having to be filled with the anxiety of performance anxiety. And he had created some monthly columns, and there was one, they were going to be done by the different editors in rotation. And one was called TDC, and it was about things like extending the life of your battery, how to deal with corroded contacts, check your tire pressure frequently. And he said, nobody here wants to do this. Would you like to do this column? You do it every month. We'll pay extra, $300. So, yeah, again, getting my nails into the fabric of the action. And my idea of TDC was that it should be a letter from me to like-minded persons about what I was finding interesting at the moment. And that seemed to work. It kept on for years. I think actually it's we've only left it behind now that we're not doing the subscribers equity issue.
It always worked on me, Kevin. Say, that's the reason that's happening to me.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay, that's what I need to do. Of course.
I think what you just said, what's interesting to you, I want to write a letter about what's interesting to myself, to me, and speaking as Kevin. And that's what I think you guys have in common, is of a natural ongoing curiosity. Obviously, Kevin's is more molecular curiosity than the average person.
More specific, I like.
Yes, much more specific. But I think, I think my experience with working with you guys is that you're seeking the universals, whether it's a physical universal or a metaphysical universal. I think that's one of the things that you guys have had in common, is undying curiosity,
which people like.
Yeah. Well, when
because it's not a meatloaf, a dry meatloaf presentation like how to extend the life of your battery.
Yeah.
Let's join hands and not read this. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, for me in this work, I've always felt it's kind of like money laundering experience, so to speak.
Never done it myself.
Yeah.
I don't have enough money to launder.
Yeah, but in the sense that, working with Peter, we can say like, well, wouldn't we like to, hey, Peter, you have an R90S and a Norton Commando A50 in the garage.
Mm-hmm.
Shouldn't we, that's like,
gotta do something.
We got to do something with those.
Yeah.
You own both of those bikes at the same time, and we could put an experience together. And then we go to do that. And this is how it's related to the curiosity part, is that you're interested in the geology of the area. You're interested in the people who have inhabited the area and where things have come from. And then when we encounter people, especially anyone on a motorcycle, it's sort of like, hey, what are you doing? And just like a natural string of questions.
Right.
And I see that with motorcycle people, or at racetracks, and, or at dinner with Malcolm Smith and Mert Lowell, we had a dinner at the Quail Motorcycle Gathering, and I said, hey, Peter, there's a seat. We can get you to the table with Malcolm, and send him over. And they had dinner with. And
I was there in about 5 seconds.
Tornado of dust.
Yeah.
Yes. And away you went.
Yeah. What a great evening with Malcolm.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's.
And his wife who's very interested. She's a pilot.
Joyce, yeah.
Joyce is really a character too. She's
a pilot, flies down to Mexico, landed. She was talking about landing on the beach with her grandkids and shopping for a new plane. Really, you would expect.
Yeah, I think they flew a 182 down there, and they had a place at Gonzaga Bay. And I've been through there a couple of times on motorcycle trips and a Jeep trip. I did a couple, whole length of Baja trips on doing different stories or just trips. And I had stopped there and looked at that landing strip, and I said, boy, this is a great place. I'd like to have a cottage down here and be able to fly down. And turned out that's where Malcolm and his wife they had a house down there. So,
and of course, Malcolm's on our mind because of his recent passing.
Yeah, it is.
And it got me thinking about On Any Sunday and the cultural impact that movie made, and why it has endured. It's cross-generational. Kevin was talking about, I think it was Kevin, the announcer, or was it you talking about the announcer? Which one of you said?
I was.
Yeah, Kevin was talking about the announcer, and that sort of, what did you say about that? There was like an energy.
I said that it was very measured in delivery, but the things that he said indicated that he was stuffed with things to say that were going to burst forth at some point. It was, and the nature of his word choices indicated that really he wanted to be a lot more wild than the delivery that he was producing, but he was going to keep it to a level. And it made it seem like, let's watch this whole thing and see if this guy blows. It was
Bruce
good.
Brown.
Bruce Brown, yeah, he did the narration and the a lot of filming, and yeah, he has a cheerful way of the whole movie. Just makes motorcycling sound like fun, even when you're losing a flat track race and crashing into the hay bales. Yeah. There's a little, sad or violent music, but then it's back. But he was back the next day and just happy as can be, and taking the cast off his foot.
My favorite line is, "There goes Malcolm, smiling from ear to ear."
Yeah,
and he's just
crashing like Nepal or somewhere, going about 120. Yeah, just
I loved the Mert Lowell aspect of it, and driving out of Tiburon in his Ford van, man in a van with a plan, and all of the other players in that movie. But I always felt like Malcolm was the buoyancy, because he was smiling, and as serious as Malcolm was, and his application of talent, he also, he had a very very kind spirit, and also a very curious spirit. And so he would ask questions, and Malcolm Smith would ask me, "What are you riding? What do you like to do with motorcycles?" And it was always I always just felt like he really was a very buoyant part of that.
Tell
movie.
About him.
Yeah, tell about him. Yeah. Yeah.
I was with Steve Kimball once when I first came to Cycle World, and we went down to the corner Union 76 station to fill up a couple of bikes. Steve Kimball gave him his credit card that said CBS magazines on it, Cycle World. And the guy, this is when you couldn't pump your own gas still. They had a young guy who's a teenager who's a gas pump attendant. And he looked at the card and he says, "You guys work for Cycle World magazine?" And Steve said, "Yeah." And he says, "So all you got to do for a living is ride around on motorcycles and then tell about it?"
Yeah.
And Steve said, "Yeah, that's a good summary of what we do." And he says, "Wow, I'd like to do that." He says, "You don't have to know how to type, do you?" And Steve said, "Oh, yeah, you've got to know how to type."
I don't know
He says,
how.
"Can't you tell it to a secretary?" And he said, "No, you got to type it yourself and give it to the secretary." And he says, "Oh, bummer."
Yeah.
That was the end of his journalism.
Yes.
That typing thing, just,
Yeah.
yeah. But Steve and I used to say, let's just ride motorcycles and tell
about it.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Well, it is.
I love that job description. Yeah.
How did you get started doing that? We got to have the Peter Egan origin story.
Oh, well.
First, you learned to type.
Yeah, I took typing in high school.
I did too.
Yeah. And then I majored in journalism in college.
The job offers came forward.
I got out, and the job offers were just flooding in because the Chicago Sun and about 20 other newspapers had just closed, in the last 2 years. So, everywhere I went to apply for a newspaper job, I bring in my pathetic, series of articles I'd written for little college papers and so on, and they'd look at it and the guy would say, "Well, I've got 6 people who used to work for the Chicago Sun who would like to live here and get out of Chicago or they'd like to live in Reedsburg or Baraboo or somewhere, And he said, "So I don't know whether to hire." "Well, you've done 2 stories I see for a newspaper, And, and then he'd open a file cabinet full of applications from people who already had 12 years of experience on major newspapers. Okay.
Yeah.
But anyway, I
started working on cars.
Well, I put up rain gutters for 2 years or a year and a half, and then I was racing. I was supporting my racing habit by putting up rain gutters, and I saw that Chris Beebe, who ran Foreign Car Specialists, was advertising for an apprentice mechanic. So I thought, well, that'd be more interesting, So I went to work for him as a car mechanic. But while I was working, I worked for about 9 years, I think 8 or 9 years as a foreign car mechanic. I was racing bikes and cars. And I kept trying to write short stories, and I wrote one novel. It didn't go anywhere. It just kept, thud, come back to me. And like Kevin, I'd send an article out, and it would get, "We have looked at it. Thank you very much for your submission. I don't think it doesn't meet our needs at this time." And but I wasn't having any luck getting published by Playboy magazine, for instance, on a short story. It turned out they liked John Updike better than Peter Egan. And so my friend Howard Sprengel, who was a bike mechanic, said, "Why don't you write about something you're interested in instead of trying to write a dramatic thing about, I don't know, people on the road or something. He's write about motorcycles. You're racing a motorcycle. You're right. You take motorcycle trips." I said, "Yeah, I guess so." He said, but I said, "There aren't many magazines that publish touring stories. I don't know what I'd write." And he said, "Well, a couple of them do." And so I sent one off, I think it was to Road Rider first. And they said, "Well, it reads okay, but we need fantastic pictures. Do you have any great pictures?" And I said, "No, I've just got a few snapshots from the trip." So I was very depressed because I'd worked on it for about 3 months. The whole summer I kept typing it and retyping it and sending. And so I threw it in a drawer and I felt real, glum. And my friend Lee Hagelin said, "Well, aren't there any other magazines?" I said, "Well, Cycle World occasionally, Cycle and Cycle World are the 2 big ones. And Cycle World occasionally runs a touring story." He says, "Well, it's just sitting in a drawer. Send it to them." So I did, and lo and behold, Alan Girdler actually read it and wrote a real nice letter back to me and said, "We love the story, and if you have anything else, send it to us." And so that's how it started for me. But I think Howard Sprengel's advice to write about something you're interested in is the secret. For me,
Certainly. Yeah.
yeah. Something you love to do, and so I freelanced for Cycle World for about 3 years, and then I hit them up for a job. And luckily, John Nutting had just left and moved back to England. They had a vacancy at the same time I happened to apply. And so I got hired as technical editor. He was an engineer, and I was
you
not.
guys had the same title.
Yeah. Alan Girdler said, "You're going to have to talk your way through this with the publisher because you would be the first technical editor who doesn't have an engineering degree." So when I went up and talked to Dick Bartkus, he said, "Well, why would you be engineering editor? Have you ever done anything technical?" And I said, "Well, when I got out of college, I took 2 semesters of engine rebuilding, and I built my own racing engines, and I took welding and machine shop. I build my own race cars and work on my own motorcycles." He said, "Yeah, okay, that'll work." And so I didn't have much, but all I really had to do as technical editor was take letters for the technical column on why doesn't my new KZ 550 run better, or whatever it is, my new Suzuki, it seems lean at idle. And so I spent a lot of time calling PR people or engineers at different motorcycle companies to find out what their advice might be. And it was a learning experience for me too, to find out what they thought could be done for various running problems. But anyway, that was it essentially, just freelancing and working at it. So
amazing. I got a job as a temp at Cycle News randomly. I was just hanging around looking for work, and my friend said, "You got to go to this temp agency. They have better jobs." But it was all the way across Southern California, and I was driving a '69 Jaguar E-Type as my daily driver.
That was too far to go then.
And I was like, "Dude, I can't drive to Long Beach every day from Brea." And I did have a GS 550, but it was pretty beat down. But he convinced me to do it, and I was desperate because I was typing. I could touch type numbers, and one of my temp jobs was touch typing all the paper inserts that were going into a 1,000 extension phone system for a healthcare company. And I was typing the full phone number and then the extensions that would go below that they would slide in.
Oh man.
And I was doing that. So I was desperate to do something else. And he's like, "You got to do it. They're better jobs. It pays better." And I went to the agency and they said, "Yeah, it's a proofreading job." They wouldn't tell you what it was because they didn't want you to end run, and go get the job outside of the agency. He said, "Would you be comfortable proofreading?" And I had nailed, I could type fast and I spelled necessary correctly. And I'm like, I could proofread. Absolutely. And she said, "Well, we sent somebody on the job. We'll get you in. If that doesn't work out, we'll give you a call." And they did give me a call the next day because the woman said, "I'm going to take a walk at lunch." And she took a walk at lunch and never came back. And so they needed someone to go in. So they sent me, and she said, "Well, it pays this. It's these hours. And are you interested?" "Yes, I'm interested." "Okay, the magazine is Cycle News."
Oh, great.
And I was like, look at that. And I had a Cycle News laying over there, and I just walked in the door, and that was it. Just started doing, I love products so much. That's, I loved racing. I love racing still, but I was always interested in reading and writing about product and technical development and things like that. So I worked really hard to do that at Cycle News. And then I was informed that a job was coming open at Cycle World, and I always felt like that's where you'd want to go because of Peter Egan and Kevin Cameron and a lot of talent on the staff full time, and it was remarkable. So yeah, that's what I applied and wrote a fairly unconventional resume, which I won't recount, but
I think timing, it occurs to me all the time when I think about the magazines. Timing is everything. I mean, Alan Girdler had just taken over Cycle World a couple months before I sent my story in, and somebody else might not have liked it, and that would be that. And it was just, my friend Howard might not have said you should send it to a motorcycle magazine, and I might not have tried to ride to the West Coast on a Norton Commando that dropped a valve in Montana.
Yeah.
So I had a story to write. And so I don't know how you recreate the sequence of odd things that make you end up where you do. But there's a lot of odd timing involved, I think. Who's in the office that day and what, like you know, having that opening.
Yeah. Well, I had to be exactly desperate enough to go apply for a job that I was sure I didn't want, you know, at a different.
I did a lot of those.
Yeah.
When Cycle was going to be resorbed by the mothership, Steve Anderson phoned me up and said in a rather conspiratorial presentation, he said, their Cycle World's going to offer you $5,000 to sign, and you should ask for more. And I thought, yeah, I should ask for a full-time job. Because I was on a freelance basis at Cycle that whole time. And in fact, at one point, Phil, in his dislike of being captain, tolerated a situation in which I didn't get paid for a couple of months for something that they had received. So I wrote something for Cycle World, and Phil called me up and said, well, whatever caused you to do this? I mean, that's our competitor. And I said, I wasn't getting any money and I needed some, and they offered me some. Well, what did they pay you? And I told him, and he said, well, we can do that. And I said, but when I asked you, you told me that it would make me the highest paid moto journalist in America. Oh.
And why not?
So I phoned up Cycle World and I said, I'd like to join the middle class. And I'd like to talk about it. Well, we'll fly you out. So I went out and we had a little conference in the afternoon, and they said, well, what are you thinking of? And I said, I'm thinking of 50,000. And they sort of looked at me and they said, well, that's a lot of money. We'd have to phone New York. And I thought, this is very encouraging.
Did you give them the money for the phone call? Go to the pay. Here's a handful of quarters. Go to the nearest payphone.
Yeah. So, as they say, we slept on it. And the next morning they said, New York said yes. So that was, I got on the payroll at that point, and going to the Shady Glen 2 miles down the road here became a little more frequent after that. It was delightful. Yeah. And so that was good. But in 1982, when Phil gave me the column TDC to write, I found that it had a good effect on my writing, because writing small, writing short, trying to get through a subject in 1,000 words or 1110 or whatever it became was a challenge. And it helped me overcome the various problems that I saw in my writing, which was, I'm not really here, and I'd like to arrange it so that if anyone reads it, what I've written, that they won't know it's me. And I didn't like that. That was embarrassing. But TDC was a manageable format. And so I worked at cramming it all in. And then I would read it aloud, because there's nothing like reading aloud to reveal embarrassing nonsense in what you've written. I don't do it anymore. My life has changed. But in those days, I was in the house alone. from after breakfast until just before dinner, and I could read aloud to my to my heart's content. And of course, my dad, who was in publishing all his life, said, adopt a concise, muscular style, avoid excessive use of adjectives and adverbs, and take responsibility for what you've written. Just say it. Don't say it is believed, it is said, I read somewhere. Just say it. And it really helped me. So there's another element. And I think
writing to length has always been a big part of, when you get.
Yeah, I had the same thing with Cycle World columns, depending on the layout at different times, and Road and Track too. But it was supposed to come out at 1,100 and, as you said, 40 words or something like that.
Yep.
It was typical. Somewhere between 1,100 and 1,200 words, I think, was pretty normal for a column on a printed page. And you really tighten things up when you have to do that, because you get 2/3 of the way through it and you realize you aren't getting toward the conclusion yet.
Yeah.
And so you better back up and I had a great lesson in reading or writing at Road and Track. I had gone there moved upstairs in the same building from Cycle World, and Cycle World did very long road tests. If you did a road test on the new Yamaha, whatever, 650, you wrote everything you could find out about the bike, how the cams were hardened in those days, and how they had changed the piston ring design, and so you just investigated every element. And I got assigned, I think, the new 84 Corvette, and I wrote about I think I wrote about 16 typed pages, which was sort of a typical Cycle World road test. And I took it into Dottie Clendenin's office. She was our copy editor and overall editor. And she said, I handed it to her and she weighed it in her hand like it was heavy. And she said, "What's this?" And I said, "That's the Corvette road test." And she said, she pages through it and she says, 16 pages? And I said, "Is that too long?" And she says, "How about 8 pages?
Yeah.
And I said, "Oh boy, I don't know." I said, "I guess, I think I could shorten it." And she said to me, "Oh, honey, it'll cut like butter. Just give it to me if you don't want to do it."
Yeah.
And then she said, "I've never read anything that wasn't improved by making it shorter, ever."
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. So I said, "Well, that's interesting advice from somebody who's been doing it for a long time."
Yeah.
But I always think it'll cut like butter.
No.
These are important thoughts I had. I can't.
They're mine. They're important.
They're special. Yeah.
I always like to just launch into the subject and get a lot of stuff down on paper so that I could then say, well, this doesn't belong here.
Mm-hmm.
And this is clumsy, and just start the process of ameliorating it. And
well, there's that word.
asperities, yes.
Yeah. Oh, it was asperity. I'm sorry.
He looked at the manuscript with a certain asperity.
Yeah.
But I just like to get stuff down on paper, but then there are times when you just have to do an outline.
Mm-hmm.
If you have points that must positively be in the story, I don't see an alternative to that.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, in school they taught us all the structure, and that didn't take with me. I just wanted to get it on paper so I could look at it and see what can I do with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was never regimented about it, really. I never, like writing classes where they would want you to grid out what you're doing and put your bullet points and your numbers and stuff. And I'm like, no, I just,
doesn't work really.
Yeah, I have a list of things that I know, if I'm doing the road test, you hear something that from an engineer, you're talking, that's important. And then you sort of settle on what you think the most important thing is. And that's where I start. And then we kind of wind our way to the finish line.
Yeah, I think a paragraph has to suggest the next paragraph sometimes. You can't have mapped it out ahead of time when you aren't thinking about the particular part of the subject that you're writing about. Wouldn't you agree, Kevin?
Well, it's all in your head, and
yes,
parts of you that you're not in control of are trying to do this work while you're mechanically tapping away at the keyboard, and it's a good thing that it happens, because
or
that way
guitar, or...
you're getting steered.
Yeah, you're getting steered.
Mm-hmm.
Your mention of playing a guitar interested me, because I once talked with a BMW rider at a BMW meet. All the people there had no idea why anyone would ever ride any other motorcycle.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, well, for me, the motorcycle is a mind-cleansing tool. He said, I'm a chemist. I'm working on a problem, some process or other, and I can't see my way through it. And I'll get on my bike and ride. And the motorcycle requires that you take all your attention and give it to survival, like a squirrel. Squirrels are alert. Motorcyclists are alert. And he said, when I would finish riding 3 or more hours later, I would have a solution in my mind and have no idea how it got there. And I could see that, we've read about J.S. Bach sitting at the organ. Presumably the boy operating the blower had been suitably rewarded, and just playing variations, just sitting there at all those manuals and the pedal section, playing variations. And those mental processes would come up with novelties, and he could include those. And I always liked the notion that here is a solid urban guy with a family and so forth, not a starving artist in a garret. Maybe on a warm day at a picnic with his children climbing on his ample self. And then he thinks to himself, oh, the Margrave of Hesse is coming Sunday. I'm going to need some canzonas. And that it's work. It's not inspiration or something deeply felt necessarily. It could be, but it's work. And he cranked out those canzonas, and he is well remembered. And some of the others who were better regarded in his time are no longer so well regarded. So who knows? I just think that the motorcycle is a good exercise for someone whose mind is too full of irrelevancies and it needs a cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that music can do the same thing, because it imposes a pattern in the same way that the motorcycle imposes self-preservation. It just rearranges your mind for a moment. Maybe things will jiggle into a useful pattern and a good outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. I've been playing the piano, taking piano lessons, and it's a definite shift in consciousness if you keep after it. You can't sit down and you can't think about the bills, or you can't think about water leaks or leaky faucets or anything. You can, but at least you don't get hurt at the piano. I mean, I have occasionally. But...
Mm-hmm. Your mind doesn't wander too much.
But yeah, you have to, for it to be to bring about maybe the altered state of consciousness that we would want.
Mm-hmm.
You got to focus. I think we talked about guitars or music and motorcycles and what the connection was at that dinner at the Quail. You had your book signing, and I think the comment that stuck with me is that, well, you know, motorcycling is participatory,
Mm-hmm.
and music is, music's not meant to be wallpaper. I mean, it can be, but
it isn't.
But you want to participate. You want to be there. You want to feel what's going on and live that music.
Yeah, it's always interested me how many people I know who ride motorcycles are musicians and or somehow connected to music. And my brother Brian spent his life. He was a disc jockey at first, and then he was a music director for different radio stations, rock and roll stations. And he would call me and say, I just interviewed. We had an interview with this or that rock and roll band, and there are five people in the band, and 4 of them are Cycle World subscribers, and have motorcycles. And that's the other thing they do besides practice guitar or play music, is they ride motorcycles. And yet you start thinking about, well, I just saw the new Bob Dylan movie last night. Of course, there are a couple of scenes in there where he's riding his Triumph. And actually, in the first scene, it looks like he's riding an older Norton. It looks almost like an Atlas, but maybe an earlier, smaller version. I'm not quite sure what it was, or just passing. But I thought, he was always photographed on bikes. And the Allman Brothers, of course, 2 of them were killed on motorcycles. Never mind that, but they were, avid motorcyclists. And it goes on and on. I mean, Lyle Lovett was a motocross kid, and still loves motorcycles. And Elvis, Buddy Holly, almost anybody in rock and roll seems to have had a connection with motorcycling. Even Bruce Springsteen learned to ride a motorcycle late in life. He had some trouble, he said. I read his autobiography, learning to drive. He was getting the relationship of the steering wheel to direction and so on. So he persisted and became, an avid car person and motorcyclist. So it seems to just run in the. I don't know whether the 2 are connected genetically somehow or what, but. What about you, Kevin? Do you have any musical interests? So obviously,
it's a difficult thing because at some point in my teenage years, my parents got me a record player, that kind with a handle.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
And in the attic of this house that we were in was a huge collection of 78 RPM classical music. So I would go up there and come down with 10 pounds of plastic and try it. And I decided that a lot of the music I had heard in advertising or as themes for 15-minute radio shows. And I'd already heard that enough. So that struck off a number of composers. And somehow I ended up with the Baroque. That I liked the complexity, the degree of predictability, but with surprises. And I got as far as the music library at school and took an interest in tracker organs and how they were constructed. But I wasn't prepared to put in the time to learn to play or to read music.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a passive experience. And then when I came out here, I was busy and music did not resound in these premises. And finally, we bought another little record player, and I got out all my stuff and played it. And I thought, I don't really want to go back to 1962. So I've kind of left it. I'll go back and give it a whirl, but it just left my existence.
I think it helps if you have an equipment fixation too. I mean, most of the guitar players I know love the instruments themselves and amplifiers, and
oh yeah,
it's a just as you are with motorcycles, it becomes I have a friend who was here this weekend for Christmas who makes his own. He's a very good guitar player, and he builds his own from kits, and and then he puts them together, and it's like restoring or building a motorcycle.
Sure.
Yeah.
I was given an old band flute,
Mm-hmm.
beat up box, and it wouldn't play lower notes. It needed to be repadded.
Mm-hmm.
And I bought a set of pads for it, and a lot of the springs were weak as well. So I made new coil springs for it instead of the leaf springs. And eventually I got it so it would play right down to the bottom of its range. And those pads sealed up nicely, fish skin. But I never learned to play the instrument.
Well, I think Mark is taking piano lessons, and I think if he learns to read music well, he may be the first good guitar player I know who can read music. Because
never find it on the neck, but yeah, sure, I can read it.
What are these funny squiggles they have on these lines? And it's just I played with some people who do know music, and then other people who are very good also have no connection to written music at all. They're self-taught, and they listen and they replicate.
This is the thing. Language greatly preceded written language. Written language is a poor substitute for conversation.
Mm-hmm. We got a
kitty. And I think that music has to be written so that it can be transmitted over distances. Oh, here's the latest stuff. Let's see how it sounds. There used to be song pluggers. I met a woman who had been a song plugger at a New York City department store. Her job was to sit at a piano all day at Christmas time, playing sheet music as a promotion. Oh, I'd like a copy. And so naturally, the ability to play music or to sing takes precedence, and writing it down later became the means of teaching it.
Mm-hmm.
But because the guitar is a way of looking at life, and there it is in the corner, why don't I pick it up and do something with it? That's not written.
Yeah, learning to read though was freeing for me, because I could never read music, and I would find something interesting that I would play, but I couldn't really preserve it unless I absolutely remembered it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started being able to write it down, and I was like, well, this is a good idea. I can put these notes in, and I've got blank sheets, and I can just put a dot, put a tail, and it doesn't even have to be ultra precise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to nail the timings or anything, but I can get the progression of notes and chords.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Otherwise, you're like a pre-literate society that has no written record, and you rely on archaeologists to figure out why they built that big building and where they're buried, and nothing gets passed down. It's I took trombone in 7th and 8th grade, and I didn't really want to play trombone. It was assigned to me, and so
that's how it goes. Like, no, there's no more of those. You gotta take that one.
As they say, I slowly backed away, and so I dropped that. But my mother got me a plastic ukulele for a quarter from a church sale and brought it home, and I started fiddling with that. And it was right at the time that folk music started really hitting big, with Bob Dylan and all these people, and I started playing that. And so finally I asked for a guitar for Christmas, and my mother said, well, Peter plays that darn ukulele all the time. I suppose he might actually stick with it if we get him a guitar for $20. And so that was that.
Well, we have the trombone in common, so I did it in 7th grade. Trombonist.
Yeah. I tried out for band, and the band director said, 7th grade, he said, what would you like to play? And I said, drums. He says, no, we got too many drummers. What's next? And I said, saxophone. And he hands me a dry saxophone reed, and says, play a note with this. And I looked at it, and I went, something, made some terrible sound. And he says, nah. And he says, what else would you like? And I said, probably trumpet. And he looks at me, and he says, no, I think your lips are too thick to play trumpet. And so I wanted to go look in a mirror and see if that was true. But anyway, he handed me a bigger mouthpiece, and he said, make a sound with this. And I went, oh, this is trombone. Next.
Yeah,
and
right.
I walked out there, trombone. Okay.
Well, see, it's not inspiration, is it? It's just you got to do the work.
A few of us had gathered in a friend's room where he had a 1959 Honda Bentley 125 twin. And standing in a corner, the Bentley Speed Kit, which included megaphones.
Oh, yeah.
One of our number was a tuba player. Tubas have large mouthpieces, and he gave himself a black ring on his mouth by trying a few notes into the megaphone. He said, this thing has possibilities. Let's go up to my room. I've got a mouthpiece. So he put on a music -1 of a Bach horn concerto, and he did a fair job with this valveless monster filled with carbon, indicating rich condition. I wish I could hear it now. He couldn't reach all the notes, but he made a good job of it.
I think my trombone was running lean. It missed a lot of notes.
Leaded.
Yeah.
Lead residue.
Yeah.
Well, very good, folks. We're going to move on to our next thing. We appreciate you guys listening to the podcast. We hope you enjoyed Peter Egan and Kevin Cameron in the same virtual room. It's the first time I've ever
with a cat helping.
With the cat. We got
and the dog. The dog was here too.
Yeah, you didn't see the dog, but it's
the menagerie is all here.
Yeah. But it's been a real pleasure to work with you guys all these years and talk motorcycles and live the motorcycling life. And I'm glad we could sit down and
likewise
share a hour and 40 minutes with the audience, and maybe we'll get to do it again one of these times.
I'm glad I didn't have to go all the way to Daytona Beach to talk to Kevin too. That's
in a rented
house.
A bottom line here for many of the Peter Egan fans that we have is that what he's revealed here in this hour and a half is that his graceful writing style is not something that he learned at school, because you can't. That is his writing style.
I didn't learn nothing there.
Yeah.
Yeah. No.
Well, see, you're going to make us not end. You're going to make us not end the podcast, because that was always the thing. I think one of the reasons that the relationship exists is because Peter's just being himself. Peter's being a natural person, and we all identify with that and connect with that.
I'd like to be someone else, but I just can't. It doesn't work.
I just can't.
Yeah. And so we would be remiss without if we don't mention our sponsor, Mecum auctions. The Las Vegas auction is coming up at the end of January. There's a link in the description that would take you to the auction lots, etc. They run financing. We always focus on the most expensive bikes at the auction. We look at our Breath Superiors, we look at our Vincents and our pre-World War I Indian board track racers and all those things that command so much money. But there are many good buys. Las Vegas has 2,000 plus motorcycles typically. It is the highest concentration of interesting hardware, and you can own any piece of it, which is always daunting but wonderful. Like you can go, and if you got the means, you can get it.
You're going to be there. It sounds like something I have to.
It's hard to It's hard to miss because you get to see so much in one place, and it all has the promise of your ownership. That's what I find exciting about it.
Tempt yourself.
Well, it is.
Yes.
It's so tempting, and you get to see so many things in one room. It's just it's overwhelming and wonderful. Mecum has financing options where you can buy, you can bid online, etc. You don't have to go, but going to the auction has always been a wonderful experience for me. And I've missed a few bargain bikes. I should have bought that. I didn't register one year, and I was like, I should register, and I'll register. I didn't register, and there went that matchless that I wanted, and it was a real nice bike out of a museum. And so that I learned my lesson. We always register. We're ready to buy because you just don't know. So we thank Mecum for sponsoring the podcast, and see you in Vegas, eh?
All right.
All right. Thanks for listening, everybody. Join us in the comments, join the conversation, and like and subscribe. We appreciate it.